Shenhe is the newest cryo polearm character in Genshin Impact. She's a 5-star character that at first glance appears to be strictly support. She also appears fairly niche, and her obvious matches are limited to the likes of other 5-stars like Ayaka. But if you've seen my video about Chongyun, you know that this guy is the key to unlocking her DPS potential. Shenhe's basic attack deals physical damage. She isn't capable of infusion without other character assistance, so if you're looking to unlock her DPS potential while also staying true to her more supportive nature, pairing her with Chongyun goes a long way. Shenhe's skill has 2 different versions. The version you use changes the amount of Icy Quill she distributes to each character within your team, and possessing an Icy Quill increases the amount of any source of cryo damage. This bonus damage is based on a percentage of her total attack and is added as a flat talent modifier after talent multiplication. The tap version grants 5 quills for 10 seconds and the held version gives you 7 for 15. In addition, Shenhe's second passive, Spirit Seal Communion, gives your 10-second version 15% bonus elemental skill and burst damage, and the 15-second version gives a 15% buff to all basic attacks. The idea behind Shenhe's skill is encouraging the player to swap between all their characters and burn through their supply of quills fairly quickly before returning to Shenhe and repeating the rotation once more. With Chongyun's cryo infusion, the source of cryo damage can be extended beyond skills and bursts, and can be utilized in your combo damage as well. In multiplayer settings, Shenhe's skill effectively increases damage all at once, but then falls off rather quickly until your cooldown wears off. Her first constellation, Clarity of Heart, is what I call the multiplayer constellation. This gives you 2 charges of your elemental skill. Admittedly, I have mixed feelings on this constellation. On the one hand, it will provide more Icy Quills. On the other, I'm not a fan of how restrictive her buff is without it, since the amount of quills you consume is multiplied by the amount of attacks you perform and the amount of enemies you hit. In teams that don't utilize Chongyun, however, the limited number of quills won't be as noticeable at C0. Continuing in this vein, the rate you'll be swapping characters against groups of enemies might be far greater than when up against single targets. In single-player boss runs, the flow of battle might feel far more natural and less rushed, even with infusion. You also have a fairly short timer to run through all your character skills and combos, so this nitpick of mine might not actually hold any weight. At any rate, her first constellation is great for situations with which you do find yourself burning through them too quickly, and eases the tension of waiting on your cooldown when you're out. As far as I'm aware, the wording implies that each quill's existence is counted separately, so it may be possible to use both the held and tap version of her skill in succession to grant both versions of her Ascension buff. Further down the line, her 6th constellation prevents the Icy Quill from being consumed when a character receiving her buff is performing a normal or charged attack, which further enhances the mob fight experience. This is pretty cool, but unless you have a lot of disposable income or an insane amount of luck, this isn't exactly accessible to most players. Notably, with her 6th constellation unlocked, it further powers her 4th constellation, Insight, which stores stacks of Skyfrost Mantra every time a character benefits from her Icy Quill. Since it doesn't require the quills to be consumed, her 6th constellation allows you to more easily reach her maximum of 50 stacks. These Skyfrost stacks are consumed upon the next use of her skill, and it allows it to deal up to 250% more additional damage. That is a lot, but remember that you do not need constellations to make a character playable and enjoyable. However, it can be something to look forward to in the event she gets a rerun and you've got some wishes saved. Now we can finally move on to Shenhe's Burst. This one's pretty simple. You use it, and it deals damage over time that reduces physical and cryo resistance. Her first Ascension passive provides 15% cryo damage to any character within its AoE, and her second constellation, Centered Spirit, improves the crit damage of cryo attacks by another 15%, as well as increasing the duration of her burst by 6 seconds. So if it wasn't obvious, a lot of detail centers around Shenhe and her skill. It's a valuable buff to cryo units, but it does have its limits that do become easier to work around the more constellations you have. This may not be a very popular aspect of her design and will be a fairly valid concern for most players, but I'm still fairly certain that in single player situations, your C0 Shenhe will perform just fine. So now we will move on to the builds portion of the video. Because Shenhe's skill is based on her maximum attack, it's possible that a lot of advice is going to lean in on this and suggest going overkill with stacking her attack. Personally, I don't think this is the best idea. It essentially means that she's a glorified stat stick taking up a valuable character slot. However, in the interest of promoting a variety of playstyles, I'll show you what that build looks like. Shenhe is going to need a polearm with a high base attack and an attack percent substat. Our top contender for 5 stars is obviously her signature weapon. And for 4 stars, we have the Wave Rider, the Royal Spear, and the Lithic Spear. Unfortunately, most of these options require the weapon banner. The only free option is the Royal Spear, and it's actually surprising that a weapon from the Royal series can actually be considered for a character build. Usually people tell you to avoid them at all costs. Now, if you do end up messing with the weapon banner, the Lithic Spear is great, and outclasses both the Royal Spear and the Wave Rider very quickly because of one particular detail outlined in its passive. The more Liyue characters in your party you have, the more attack percent you receive. So for your 4-star options, this is your best option if your ideal build is the Shenhe stat stick. Your artifact set bonus will have to be the 2-piece Gladiator and the 2-piece Shimenawa for a grand total of 36% attack. You'll also want attack percent main stats on your Sands, your Goblet, and your Circlet. If you've got good attack percent substats on your Feather and Flower, voila! Your new character is loaded to the brim with attack for days. Her personal damage won't be the best, but her buff will be fairly strong. So if this is what your heart desires, you know how to do it. However, I think the best build for Shenhe is a DPS build. I don't know if I'm alone in this thought, but I feel that her buff is wasted if she can't take advantage of it too. And if you have Chongyun, I feel there's no reason not to at least give it a try. So for those of you that want to entertain me and my idea, here we go. Shenhe as a cryo character gets one of the more powerful sets in the game because it's very forgiving when it comes to your crit rate. In a freeze team, the Blizzard Strayer set allows most of Shenhe's crit rate to come from the set passive. For the main stats, we'll be using an attack Sands, a cryo Goblet, and a crit damage Circlet. The weapons I've already listed are still fairly decent options, but you can also use weapons that improve your crit damage, such as the Blackcliff Pole. You could use the Deathmatch if you aren't secure in your crit rate, but I don't think it's necessarily needed. I'm pretty sure you already know what I'm about to say. Shenhe and Chongyun open up each other's DPS potential. If you pair them together, you will get the most out of both of them, and I promise you that you will not regret this pairing, because Chongyun's Frost Layer will add so much value to her Icy Quills and the rest of your team. It also means she can finish your damage rotation strong, since building her for cryo damage gives you more bang for your buck. So do it, I dare you. Build your Shenhe as a DPS. Now of course, my opinion aside, build your character how you want to. The game's a lot more fun when you get to experiment and try all sorts of different combinations, and it really sucks when you put yourself in a box. These are just my suggestions for anyone who got a little lost or is more of an auditory learner. Ultimately, the choice on how to build your character is up to you, and it's far more important that you're having fun. So I hope all the Shenhe mains out there are enjoying themselves, and I'll see you next time. So until then, stay tuned.